Ukraine, living with war. We take you back into Ukraine for the latest on the Russia invasion. How are Ukrainians adapting as war becomes a part of their day-to-day lives? What are the consequences of the fighting outside of the country? Plus, how does this affect Russia's relationship with other nations? Now, on the Inside Story, Ukraine, living with war.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Pursuti, VOA Senior Washington Correspondent. Later this month, we reach the 6-month mark of Russia's military attack against Ukraine. The numbers are staggering, and we'll get to some of those later on in the program. But the impact of this war is being felt throughout the world, from the price of wheat in West Africa to the relationship between Israel and Russia. We begin at the Pentagon, where $1 billion in U.S. military aid is headed to Ukraine. It comes at a key moment in the battle over Ukraine, along with a milestone of adding 2 new members to NATO. Details from VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday officially endorsing Finland's and Sweden's accession to NATO, a direct response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And in a moment when Putin's Russia has shattered peace and security in Europe, when autocrats are challenging the very foundations of a rule-based order, the strength of the transatlantic alliance and America's commitment to NATO is more important than it's ever been.
The Finns and Swedes will add small but advanced militaries to the alliance. And Finland's accession will expand NATO's border with Russia by more than 1,300 kilometers, which Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Bradley Bowman says will directly affect Vladimir Putin's calculus.
If you're a Russian military planner or you're Vladimir Putin, you're contemplating aggression against NATO, right? And you're planning to do it maybe in the Black Sea region or somewhere else, or even in the Baltics. You have to be wondering what could be coming at you from Finland if you do that.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited American troops in the Baltic nation of Latvia, a day after the U.S. announced a new $1 billion military aid package for Ukraine, the largest drawdown of U.S. military stockpiles for Kyiv to date. Russia has caused heavy casualties for Ukrainian forces, but the Pentagon says Ukraine continues to effectively use weapons provided by the West, with Russia losing 3,000 to 4,000 armored vehicles in Ukraine and even more troops.
There's a lot of fog in war, but I think it's safe to suggest that the Russians have probably taken 70 or 80,000 casualties in less than 6 months.
More graves in Bucha this week, as citizens buried unidentified victims months after Russia's occupation. Smoke bellowed from a Russian base in Crimea Tuesday morning after a loud explosion. Crimea's governor said 1 person was killed in the blast. A senior Ukrainian military official says Ukraine was behind the attack, as Russia claims the explosion was from its own detonation of ammunition on the base. Carla Babb, VOA News, Washington.
Now, on to Ukraine, where the increasing number of wounded is taxing the hospital's abilities to treat them. A rehabilitation center built to American standards 3 years ago has been left largely intact as battles rage around it. From Irpin, our Anna Kostachenko takes us inside the Next Step Rehabilitation Center.
Denis Pogrebny is a Ukrainian army veteran who suffered a spine injury while serving in the East. After surgery last year, Pogrebny arrived at the Next Step Ukraine Rehab Center on crutches. But after 4 weeks of hard work, he no longer needs them.
I want to recover and go back to my brothers on the front lines.
Volodymyr Tovkis was shot in the head September 2019 in the Donetsk region. He was in a coma for 2 weeks and had surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain. After he had stabilized, he also came here for rehabilitation.
I feel so comfortable here. I even met guys from my former squad. It feels like family.
The Next Step Ukraine Rehab Center was founded 3 years ago by Revived Soldiers Ukraine, a US-based non-profit organization. Irina Vashuk-Desipio, a US-based Ukrainian American and president of the organization, started helping injured Ukrainian soldiers in 2014 when Russia occupied part of Donbas. Later, after the center opened, she raised funds, assembled a team of professionals, and equipped it with modern equipment. Next step, Ukraine, located just outside Kiev, miraculously survived the Russian occupation, says Center Director Tetiana Grubenyuk.
The staff took away expensive equipment and evacuated the center's patients.
The center reopened after Irpin was liberated in early April. But as the war drags on, the number of patients is growing, says Grubenyuk. The center also now accepts civilians with war injuries. Serviceman Cheerful has been coming for 6 weeks now. In February, he was shot in the knee in the Donetsk region. Now he is working to return to the ranks.
Because I was lying down for a long time, my knee contracted and it does not fully bend. Now it bends at 70 degrees. But when I came here, it was 30 to 35 degrees.
The president of Revived Soldiers Ukraine plans to launch a second center in the western part of the country. It too will be funded by US donations.
A lot of our patients are disabled and temporarily cannot walk. And while Russian troops are standing on the Belarusian border, it is too risky to invite these guys for rehabilitation, because we won't be able to evacuate from here if the Russians strike again.
Since Russia invaded, Revived Soldiers Ukraine not only has helped rehabilitate soldiers and civilians, but also provided the military with assistance worth over $5 million. Anna Kostyuchenko for VOA News, Irpin, Ukraine.
Fighting to stay connected. That's what millions of Ukrainians are doing after fleeing their homeland as a result of Russia's military invasion. A few Ukrainian business owners got together to create the Help Ukrainian Center. The mission? To process international aid for their displaced fellow Ukrainians. VOA Eastern European Bureau Chief Miroslava Gangadze takes us inside the humanitarian hub in Lublin, Poland.
This is the Help Ukraine Center in Lublin, Poland, where about 150 volunteers work daily to sort, pack and deliver humanitarian and medical aid to Ukraine as Russia continues its war on the country. Colton Smith, a volunteer from California, has been helping here for 2 months.
I have had no closer connection with any conflict in my life as I have with the war in Ukraine. I've been following the developments that have been happening ever since the revolution back in 2014, and I couldn't stand by while what was going on. As I continued to do my job back in California, when the invasion broke out, my heart shattered and I couldn't smile.
Volunteers include Ukrainian refugees too. They left behind jobs, friends, families, hobbies and plans for their futures. Now they are here helping those who stayed behind. Coordinator Olga Rudneva says Ukrainian businesses, big and small, united to open the center.
And we are running here since March. We have the 900 volunteers who are ready to join us anytime. And we have another 40 people approximately every day who come here to sort humanitarian aid. So what we actually do, we gather all humanitarian aid sorted here by categories from Europe and non-EU countries as well.
In collaboration with Ukrainian government, they deliver aid to Mariupol, Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv and many other Ukrainian centers where people need immediate help. Coordinators say so far the center has delivered over 6,000 tons of humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Well-known figures also joined the effort, like the winners of the 2022 Eurovision Song Competition, the Ukrainian music rap group called Kalush Orchestra. The group volunteered a few hours before leaving to perform at the charity concert in Lublin to support the operation.
We came to the biggest volunteer center in Europe to see it, say thank you and help.
Exhausted but happy, the musicians and volunteers together sing Stefania, the group's song, which has come to represent Ukrainian refugees. The groups uplift each other with words to stay strong and united for Ukraine's future.
почути твоє рідне слово.
Мирослава Гонгадзе, VOA News, Lublin, Poland.
The old Soviet Union used to have strong ties with many countries in Africa. Those countries saw Moscow as a counter to the colonial powers that ruled them. Those ties were evident when about half of Africa's 54 nations did not support a UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion. But the ensuing food shortage caused by Russia's blockade of Ukrainian grain tested those connections. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain explains why Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, was in Africa last month, seeking allies.
Resuming shipments of Ukrainian and Russian grain has been the number one topic at each stop of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's Africa tour this week, like this one in the Republic of Congo town of Oyo.
We are pleased to welcome Sergei Lavrov, who comes with good news, including this agreement that was signed in Turkey, sponsored by the United Nations and Turkey, which should revive the marketing of Ukrainian wheat across the Black Sea and through the Bosphorus Strait.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th and its blockade of Ukraine's ports has massively disrupted grain shipments, trapping millions of tons of grain and causing global commodity prices to soar. The United Nations says an additional 47 million people are now facing acute hunger, with countries in Africa especially hard hit. Lavrov began his Africa tour in Egypt on Sunday, reassuring his host that their orders for Russian grain deliveries will be met, and blaming Western sanctions on Russia for the shortages. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia's bombing of Odessa on Saturday puts the Istanbul grain deal brokered by the UN last week in jeopardy. And Zelensky said Moscow always finds a way to renege on its promises. Lavrov said the Odessa strike would not impact grain deliveries. An expert tells VOA that Lavrov aims to shape the narrative on the food crisis during his visit to Egypt, Republic of Congo, Uganda, and Ethiopia.
Russia's blockade of grain in Ukraine's ports and deliberate destruction of Ukrainian agricultural capabilities is at the center of this effort, as Russia is trying to falsely link Ukraine's grain export with sanctions against Russia, and to falsely frame Ukraine as a responsible party in the global food crisis.
Another expert confirmed that Africa was struck especially hard by the disruption in grain supplies caused by the invasion.
Certainly, the region is feeling the impact and the implications of food insecurity. The USAID Administrator, Ambassador Samantha Power, was just out in the region and announced $1.3 billion of assistance.
Stigant told VOA that Africa depends on Russia for about 40% of its grain supplies, while about 60% of the world's uncultivated land is in Africa. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Whether it's grain from Ukraine, Russia, or the U.S., the price has skyrocketed because of the war. In West Africa, 8 countries joined forces to share locally grown cereal grains. VOA's Alison Fernandez has the details from Dakar, Senegal.
More than 50 years ago, some African countries began promoting the use of locally grown cereal grains. Bread bakers have experimented with millet, maize, and other cereals, But local grains remain underused, says Amadou Gaye, who heads the Federation of Bakers of Senegal.
In Senegal, Africa, we like to eat local. But hey, these are the only slogans in this country. For years, we've been talking about eating local, but it has never been done.
But that may change. Russia's February invasion of Ukraine, both major wheat exporters, has pushed up prices and spurred shortages of cereal grains, including in Africa. Senegal depends entirely on wheat imports, estimated at just over 700,000 tons last year, according to the country's National Statistics Agency. To actually make the use of local grains a reality, a group of African nations came together on July 21st in Dakar to form the West African Bakery and Pastry Confederation. Members plan to lobby for regional governments to lift customs barriers and implement other economic and social policies to develop the local grain sector. The Confederation has members from 8 countries so far. Besides Senegal, they include Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, and Togo. Gaye says African countries must encourage the use of protein-rich local grains such as millet, sorghum, and moringa. He mentions Senegal's eastern city of Tambacounda.
We want a cereal for each locality. Bakers in Tambacounda have to put out more bread made from the ancient grain fonio than from millet or maize. The Ivorian has to give me his banana flour and his cassava flour. I give him my millet flour. This exchange must take place.
Gaye's counterpart from Togo, Boma Bonaventure, agrees that regional trade will enhance bakers' offerings and lessen their dependence on wheat imported from afar.
Togo will perhaps use soybeans, send another cereal to the sub-region, Senegal. That way, we will have the quantity we need to produce, not do it each in his own way or corner. We will never get there otherwise.
Encouraging the growth of indigenous crops could open new markets for the products to international consumers looking for new tastes. For Alison Fernandez in Dakar, Senegal, Carol Gunsberg, VOA News.
Facing increasing opposition from world leaders, Moscow continues doing what it has done from the onset of the war, silencing voices, delivering news to Russians at home. VOA's Anna Rice explains some of the new laws that tighten the Kremlin's grip on what Russians can and cannot say about the war.
On July 14th, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed 2 bills into law. The first was called on control over the activities of persons under foreign influence. The second, on amending the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation and the Code of Criminal Procedures of the Russian Federation. Kremlin watchers say the foreign influence law is vaguely worded and dramatically increases the government's power over Russian citizens and organizations.
Now, basically, anyone can be considered a foreign agent. What is foreign influence? Someone listened to VOA and they are under foreign influence.
The new laws expanded the list of foreign agents to include TV host Tatiana Lazareva, bloggers Maxim Katz and Veronika Belotserkovskaya, and opposition member Ilya Yashin, who is in a detention facility for speaking out against the war in Ukraine.
Ilya Yashin is a known political activist, so a lot of attention is targeted at him. But we're also talking about dozens such cases.
From June 24th to July 24th alone, 13 new criminal cases were started around fake news distribution. 75 cases since the start of the war, and the law was only adopted in March.
The second law on criminal procedure that Putin signed on July 14th equates joining the enemy ranks during military activity to high treason with a maximum 20-year prison sentence.
In order to be accused of treason or being a spy, one doesn't even need to possess any sensitive information.
Vitoshkina says that since 2017, it's become a trend in Russia to accuse scientists of treason. In 2021, Viktor Kudryavtsev, a researcher at a Russian rocket and spacecraft center, died while under investigation. And Dmitry Kolker, a scientist from Novosibirsk, was arrested on suspicion of treason, taken from hospital to a detention facility, and died 4 days later of advanced pancreatic cancer.
I have a client. He is at a detention facility now. His name is Valery Kalugin, and he is turning 70 soon. In 2018, he took part in an international project authorized by the president. Part of the work included designing a supersonic plane, a civilian one, not military. A few years later, FSB comes to his home accusing him of treason.
The Russian government is presenting these legal changes as necessary measures to protect Moscow from foreign influence and to maintain national security during a time of war. VOA News, Washington.
Tensions between Israel and Russia have been escalating as Russia is trying to close an agency that helped Russian Jews emigrate to Israel. The Kremlin says the agency violates the law by gathering information on Russian citizens. Israeli officials say it likely has more to do with its support for Ukraine. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
More than 50,000 Russian and Ukrainian Jews have moved to Israel since the outbreak of war in Ukraine in late February. Many are anxious to leave Russia because of growing anti-Semitism, the economic crisis, and their worry that the repressive policies of the Soviet Union are coming back, says Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, former chief rabbi of Moscow, who was forced into exile.
Reason number one is the fear of the closing of the Iron Curtain, meaning that one day in the near future, it will be impossible already to leave Russia. This fear exists by many members of the Russian Jewish community.
The wave of immigration is handled by the Jewish Agency, a quasi-governmental body that helps Jews from around the world move to Israel. But Russia recently threatened to close down the Jewish Agency's operations in Moscow and bring the organization to court, claiming that it violates Russian law by gathering information about Russian citizens. Russian pressure to close the office has more to do with politics than anything else, according to Natan Sharansky, former Soviet dissident and former director of the Jewish Agency.
Russia, which is
almost fully isolated from the free world, is looking how to break its isolation. It's looking at how to press different countries. They are trying to press on Germany that people will start dying from cold in winter, and they are starting to press on us, among other things, for Jewish Agency.
Israeli analysts say Russia is not happy with new Prime Minister Yair Lapid's policy on the Ukraine war. His predecessor, Naftali Bennett, was careful not to criticize Russia and even flew to Moscow early in the war with an offer to mediate.
Yair Lapid, while he was still foreign minister and with the transition to the premiership, has pursued a less balanced approach. He has more clearly identified Russia as the aggressor. And it's mostly a difference in rhetorical approach than anything else. But in this conflict, rhetoric matters.
He says Russia is busy enough with the war in Ukraine and does not want a full-scale diplomatic confrontation with Israel. And it's likely that Russia will find a way to smooth over the tensions and continue to allow Russian Jews to emigrate. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Jerusalem.
That's all for now. For everyone behind the scenes who brought you today's show, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. Follow me on Twitter at CarolynVOA and follow VOA News on Instagram and Facebook. Online, stay up to date at voanews.com and watch on our streaming platform, VOA Plus. Thanks for being with us. Join us next week for the Inside Story.